G'day, welcome back to the Talking Leadership TV podcast series. Our guest today is Daniel Fletcher. He's the General Manager Community and Livability at the Western Downs Regional Council. He's a dynamic, engaging and inspiring leader, able to swiftly deliver outcomes and implement positive change. As a highly motivated and thought-provoking public sector leader, Daniel's committed to the following: reconciliation, equity, diversity and inclusion, change management and continuous improvement, data-driven decision-making, promoting and contributing to a positive organisational culture that's focused on occupational and psychological safety, and building green, clean and sustainable communities. He's passionate about being driven by value with his person-centric focus, which has created both meaningful change while navigating sensitive and complex challenges in both the business and political environment. Daniel's a graduate from the Australian Institute of Company Directors. He has studied at Griffith University, completing bachelor's in psychology and a bachelor in criminology and criminal justice, and brings hands-on experience across the public and private sector. He continues to dedicate his time to study, currently completing his Masters in Public Administration with the University of Technology, Sydney. Thanks again for joining us and supporting the podcast, but enough from me, over to Daniel. Let's get started with the first of the themes here, if we can, mate. Your leadership and its beginnings.
Yeah, sure. So I think the easy way to answer this one for me was sport. I was fortunate to be talented at some different sports at a young age. And I think as a result of that, certainly by default, not by demonstration of any particular leadership skills, certainly at that age, that meant I became selected as the captain of a number of those teams while I was younger, and that probably, well, it certainly did continue to transition as I got older in the sporting world. And I often tell this story to some of my staff as well, that my leadership journey is one that has unfolded from a career perspective in a way that we look back now on leadership or people being appointed in their leadership roles as problematic. So I certainly was able to commence and complete projects, and to a relatively high standard in a relatively short amount of time, and that was beneficial or advantageous to my superiors. So after completing one, I'd get another, and then another, and then another, and by virtue of I guess being able to complete the projects themselves, I was possibly viewed as someone who could potentially, be elevated into the next level role, not necessarily for any of the more contemporary leadership characteristics that we may discuss later, but that was certainly the beginnings, I guess, of my leadership journey.
Yeah, and it's always a trippy thing to hear from guests that where they started potentially thinking about leadership, or at least applying it in some senses, was through sport. And sport allows you to do that if you want to take that leadership role, and it really does delineate between those that are happy to follow and those that want to set the agenda. We've met these people in our days coming up, and you can tell with some people, would like to get your perspective on this, that you can just pick out who the natural leaders are, even young. They may not have all the behaviours you'd want to see in a leader, but you see that there's something more than just wanting to be a follower. Does that resonate for you, mate?
Yeah, very much so. Certainly when I look back on my younger sporting career, and even my probably less accomplished adult sporting career, I should say, that it's easy to spot the people who are willing to step forward, I guess, into those leadership roles. Less so from a career or employment perspective, but definitely my experience and observations in that sporting space. And often my observations were it was often the people that were either the loudest in some respect, and willing to, I guess, dictate certain there might be moves on the sporting field, or it might be willing to speak up in that environment, which probably predicated a lot of the captaincy and leadership decisions of younger sporting groups. And it's interesting when you consider that even now your professional sporting groups and the the different type of leaders that are leading adult teams now, even that often adult professional teams now select their own leaders as opposed to the coach or the coaching staff making a decision about who the leader will be. And that's been a huge, I would suggest, a monumental shift in leadership in the sporting space in the last couple of decades.
Yeah, have to agree. Again, it doesn't surprise me, given the country we live in, that sport offers you that opportunity. And just to morph this a little bit, because moving away from sports into your professional career, and I think we're about the same age. I'm probably a little older than you, but in your travels dealing with other potential industry sector levels of government and people you've met, I'll put this in two parts, I think. How do you define leadership for you? And has that definition changed over time from your perspective?
Yeah, this question was really challenging for me, probably because I think there's a variety of different leaders and leadership styles. And as a result, I think it's really difficult to pinpoint one definition of leadership, save for my view that leadership is the ability to influence the head, the heart, and the hands of people. Now, there is a lot more to leadership, but I think that is the core element to it. And I think a really good example of that is, if we look at a contemporary scenario now, someone like Donald Trump, by virtue of my definition, is a really good leader. I think he's leading down a very negative path, but nevertheless, the definition I apply to it means he is a good leader, and he can get individuals to think and to feel and ostensibly to act as well, in terms of voting for him and riding against the Capitol, all of those things that we see in the media here. I certainly don't support or condone that version of leadership, but it really is about the influence. And for me, it's about, the head, the heart, and the hands. So it's what is it that, how can you influence what people think, what they believe, and then what they actually do? So I don't know if it's changed over time, but I don't know if I really held a strong view on what leadership was when I was younger. And I think by virtue of just, as I explained before, being selected as a leader in a sporting team, primarily because I was probably one of the better players and willing to speak up, that didn't necessarily mean that I embodied leadership characteristics at the time. I really didn't know what a leader was. I probably felt I was a leader because I was being selected as the captain in here. And I'm really lucky that I consider myself very fortunate, because I've been exposed to some really great leaders along the way. And during the period of not knowing what leadership was, I didn't know that they were great leaders. Looking back now, I realize they were great leaders. And now I get the active choice of associating myself with good leaders. So I'm not sure if my definition changed. I probably just never really had one when I was younger, until I truly understood what leadership was.
Yeah, and definitely there is no right and wrong here. Daniel, I think just having the discussion illuminates a couple of things. I'm interested in that split between leadership with good outcomes and leadership with not so good outcomes, and Donald Trump's quite a good example of that. And look, I won't go down the politics side of things, other than to say him as a figure in the leadership space. Yeah, it's interesting. If you use your definition, he would be, in some senses, next level, because he got people to do things that, by convincing their head and their heart that those things need to be done. Now, we could have a debate, an unending debate, about whether or not that was good, bad, or somewhere in between. But I can see where you're coming from, and you're the first to bring that up. So again, just as an aside, people ask me why I do this. This is good professional development for me when you have these conversations with people, because I had never thought of it that way. And I guess as an ongoing thing, one theme that has come up quite a lot in my early podcasting days around this topic area was the reluctant leader, the reluctant entrepreneur. You've added another element to that, and it's the person who doesn't know that they're one or the other, but other people see that in them, and that having that ability to spot that talent is, I think, one of those things in your leadership toolkit that is quite handy to have, particularly if you're trying to build teams, to spot, one, what does talent look like? Two, but in that pool of talented human beings you've got working with you, who demonstrates leadership traits versus those that don't want to. Because again, this is about a choice. You make a choice to be a leader or not, and it sounds like you may have been leadership might have been thrust upon you at some point. But look, it sounds like you took it on, and I would expect most normal people like yourself don't think about leadership on a regular basis. I'm thinking about this quite a lot more than is probably normal or healthy to do. But I get that most people in a job aren't thinking about their leadership role. And I might ask you one more thing before we go on, because I'm interested in getting your perspective here. That idea about leaders being introspective practitioners, thinking about their leadership practice, is that something you're doing more now that you're in a leadership position or have had leadership experiences, or is that an ongoing discussion in your own mind, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a really profound question, because I'm actually going through a process of our quarterly updates with managers here on their performance, and it's been a topic I've been spending a lot of time talking to them about. I'm a psychology graduate, and I've, in some of my explanations to people, I find that a lot of the work I did studying at university many years ago has not necessarily helped me influence the world around me, but it's been able to help me influence myself, and as a result become a better leader, because I'm actively starting to look at myself, understand what I do, what I say, how I do things, and how that impacts other people. And I think when you can really have that strong sense of self-reflection, and the better you get at self-regulating yourself, what you're doing, what you're saying, how you're doing these things, you will inadvertently become a better leader. But it's just good to know what you're doing. And there are certainly some people that are in formal leadership positions who are poor leaders. They don't understand that. There are many people exercising leadership that have no formal authority to do so. And it's because of their actions and their words, and that they inspire trust and energy in other people. And I think that's, to me, I sort of take leadership, I look at leadership, certainly my own leadership, and focus on a coaching style of leadership. And that's served me well. And I've learned from those profound leaders in my past that's probably the style that suits me better, but also the style that I've resonated with as well as a learner from other leaders. And the way I probably encapsulate that is, it's the act of identifying that potential in someone else, then actively nurturing it, amplifying that potential. And if you do that well, your energy is invested in that, and then you become more successful, because those people are delivering for the greater good of the team or the organization. And it's really hard to do. I found that shift really challenging, because, as I explained earlier, that sense of ownership over the commencement and completion of a particular project always rested with me. And so I was comfortable with the success or failure of what that project ended up with. Now I need to be comfortable with it succeeding or failing while someone else has stewardship over it, and I take the responsibility of being the steward of helping them grow. So it's been a hugely grounding moment for me getting it right. And I don't know if I've ever got it right, but I know the path I want to keep taking. So.
Yeah, it's all in the trying, sir. I think the leadership process is a process that there aren't blacks and whites. Obviously, you're working with shades of grey when it's working with people. And now that you have to rely on the professional nature of others to get those projects done, I sense that loss of control is an issue, but I don't think that's unique to any one person. And what you're sharing is something that I believe most leaders go through at some point, and you either at some stage make your peace with it, or you rail against it and move away from leadership roles. Because my sense of this is, as you start moving up in the world, that you're going to have less and less connection to the process of delivering and final outcome. But you're really hoping you get to the final outcome because that's part of your deliverables to those above you. And I get the tension, but it's something I think you at some stage you have to come to terms with, if that's fair comment.
Yeah, it's 100% accurate. It's, I guess, maintaining that accountability over something that you ultimately don't have the intimate control over. And when you look at it, it's the good leaders who do that, and it's the good leaders who, or the great leaders who have that following where people will ensure the objective is met, because it's bigger than that one individual. It's the great leaders sell that compelling story and that compelling vision that people just buy into, and then it becomes a byproduct of what we do. It doesn't necessarily become an active choice. We're here, and in my environment, to work for the community and to serve our community and get the best outcome for our community. So, I mean, getting that into a really compelling story, brings people along in an exciting way.
Yeah, I would suggest to you that even the best, most effective leaders you'll come across in your part of the world of work or others will always have that degree of not being able to cut the cord, because it's just human nature. I don't think if we're being fair income here that it doesn't come across people's minds. Now, that said, it shouldn't be a deterrent to what you need to do. And I've seen really good leaders put so much faith and trust and build the capability of their people around them that it becomes a non-issue. It's more, what else can you be doing? And you try and limit yourself to not taking on too much, but that's a whole nother discussion. Now, you've helped me segue into the next question around sectoral perspectives on leadership issues. So if you can share with the audience what you do in terms of work at the moment and what you see at a strategic level, what you think the key leadership issues are from, I guess, from your perspective, mate.
Yeah, well, local government's a very unique environment, certainly to be a leader. I've got an incredibly supportive wife, and I remember when her and I met each other, I had explained, or certainly shared with her, my desire and ambition to continue in local government and in the public service. And I said the one thing I'd learned was that being a good leader in the public service means that my team here gets my best time and that my family gets the rest of my time. And I don't know how well she accepted that at the time, but I mean, we're married and the kids are coming freely, so let's hope it stays that way. And it's a real challenge, because I know that we often speak about that, and it would be great to be able to get the balance right. It's a constant toing and froing, and the commentary I've made in the local government and public sector perspective is that you can be a leader, but it won't necessarily mean that you're a good leader if you can't dedicate that time and the energy into doing it properly. And one of the, I guess, the centrifugal type natures of the local government space is that we have a board, ostensibly a board that is elected by the community. So they go out and have the wherewithal to put their name up and win a poster competition. Now, there's just no shortage of envy I can have for them. I have so much respect for elected members who are willing to put themselves in that position, where the ultimate prize is to do more work for your community. I think it's such a powerful message to understand at the heart of it. And when that centrifugal nature of it is that the elected members run or ostensibly govern our organisation. So through the executive, we deliver the operational piece, where the benefit of doing that well is our community gets better livability. And the community who get that livability, or the better livability, hopefully, are the ones that keep reinforcing the right people to be elected into that board to make those decisions at the relevant local level. And I think that's really unique, because while there is some similarities to the private sector where we could consider our community being the shareholders don't get to walk away from this community. in the public sector, you can be associated with that and you can walk away, you can take your dividend and you can leave. Whereas our shareholders, our community, they essentially don't have a choice. They have located themselves within a geographical boundary where they are, as property owners, they are required to pay rates, or as renters, they pay rents that flow back through to the property owner. And our obligation is to make sure that everybody who lives here, works here, and visits here has a great experience when they come here. So I think there's this real uniqueness to the local government space. And the additional layer I'll add in here is being able to work in leadership in local government means that I get to work with the elected member group. And they're a group of people who did not get to select each other. Now, as a psychology graduate, that gives me a lot of excitement to work with, but it also creates this really powerful sort of dynamic where they have a very discrete role to respond to the electors who put them in there to make sure that they stay happy, but they also need to keep each other happy. Otherwise, it could turn into absolute chaos. And we do see that. We do see some local governments that I guess there are some catastrophic outcomes for or just because governance isn't followed, or just general respect isn't applied to each other in those roles. There's a trust breakdown. The relationship between the executive arm and the political arm isn't working. So there's all these really unique nuances to the leadership space in local government, which I probably get a wicked sense of excitement and satisfaction from.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. I had the good fortune to work for a little while with the Local Government Association of Queensland and the Council of Mayors in my younger days. And yeah, that sense of giving something back to your community or to a region is quite can be quite an intoxicating thing if that's what motivates you to do the work. I never, unfortunately, had the opportunity to be in a leadership role in local government, much to my lasting regret. But I understand where you're coming from, and there'll be a lot of people listening or watching this that will agree. And yeah, you're in a constantly dynamic environment. One, because of the operational nature of working for communities, which has its own set of challenges, and you intimately know what those are. But there's also the dynamics of the elected people that are there, and I always wondered just how different that was between rural and urban locales. And I've been told, well, offline, that there are some differences, but you would think there would be differences when you're dealing with different size councils and different challenges in different parts of the state. So to say that local government jobs are the same everywhere is probably underselling the nature of what it is that you guys do, and you could not have more of a supporter here for local government, except for those rates that people have to pay or the bills that come through. But outside of that, it's all good. Yeah. Look, in that vein, Daniel, if I could ask you, and we've set a good foundation for the next area, is leader capabilities. And I will ask you more formally, I guess, what you believe are the most critical for you. And I'll give a bit of context here, because I've been asked why I asked this, go down this particular theme. Is we all have, I think, an intuitive sense of what leader capabilities matter to us if we're the led and we're working to someone, but it's very different to have the conversation around what is important to me as an individual, me in a leadership position. So I'll ask you, from that context, what leader capabilities do you believe are critical for success in the role in a leadership position? Sorry.
Yeah. It's probably really easy to develop a long list here of capabilities, because, as we've discussed, the diversity of leadership is such that it makes it easy to have a lot of capabilities in here. I focused on two because I probably wanted to drill down on these as much as I can. And the first one is emotional resilience. And to drill down on that, there is so many different levers that are pulling you as an individual in generally any leadership role, but I'll sort of keep it focused in that local government space, trying to keep so many different people happy that you will never be able to achieve that. And there's the old adage that trying to make trying to make everybody happy, you'll end up making nobody happy. And in reality, the way I've tried to frame the emotional resilience piece into leadership is, if you can make most of the people happy most of the time, emotionally, you should be able to make peace with that, because that's a really, really good outcome. And the tension, and for example, I know that we're negotiating, which I don't like the term, negotiating our enterprise bargaining agreement here. Actually, I'll tell you why I don't like the term, because I think it's powerful. If you look up the definition of negotiation, it's and there's a variety of them, but they generally focus on two or more parties that have conflicting interests. Now, I've made this statement a number of times, but our staff, the officers of the local government and the management of the local government, do not have conflicting interests. Our purpose, our goal, our objective is to make sure we deliver services to our community in a safe, efficient, and effective manner, and in a sustainable manner. But I think what's really important is, from a management perspective, the narrative that we tell in this space is, we want to be able to do that by making sure that we can offer our staff as much as genuinely possible. So that includes pay rises, that includes any other inclusion in the suite of provisions in the agreement that we can possibly put in there to ensure we can deliver our services in a safe, in an efficient, in an effective, in a sustainable manner. So I guess that's an aside. But for that emotional resilience piece, the challenge here is, and if I use that enterprise agreement example, it's not as if the organisation can provide too much to our staff. It's not possible to give an unreasonable pay rise, because then we're essentially taking from another area, which is our ratepayers, who will pay there. So the tension then would be that we're upsetting our elected members. So being able to emotionally come to terms with what are difficult factual positions and factual decisions is not an easy thing to do, especially when almost exclusively management staff have come through officer ranks in the past, so they understand. There'll always be an exception to some of the things that I'm saying, and there'll be individuals who are rogue, but I mean, the reality is, bringing facts don't care about emotions, right? But the emotions have to care about the facts. And emotionally, we need to find a way to make peace with some of those really difficult moments, that you're not going to please everybody, but pleasing most of the people most of the time is that where I want to connect into that emotional resilience piece.
Yeah, that's a really considered response. I've got questions. I guess the overriding one is, when you drill down that list, and again, the list can be as long as you need it to be when you're talking about what leader capabilities are. You've really gone down that pathway, I think, of being people focused in what you want out of leadership, or at least your own. And that's it's a good thing to hear. Not everyone will go down that pathway, but there definitely isn't a fixed or set number of those capabilities. And even if you spent a career trying to work out what they are, you only need one person to say, look, that might be okay for you, but for me, it's something else. And so the fascination for me with this topic, and to talk to good people like yourself, is that I'm not finding that there is a one unified approach to any of this. And it makes it interesting, because if it was, it'd be pretty boring, and that there'd be no, I think, personal growth in certain leadership roles. And that is, I think, what you're alluding to, that when you're negotiating with people, when you talked about, we're not two distinct groups with different agendas or outcomes, that community focus, I think, is unique to government, and particularly to local government. If if you're thinking that way. And I always come back to the reality check for me. Some people are in jobs for very functional reasons. They don't care about the greater good about being there. It's a job. They go 9 to 5 and they go home. But there are some that invest themselves quite heavily in these roles. And something that's niggling in the back of my head in this discussion, you talked about finding a balance in leadership positions. I think you've made it eminently clear that it's something that you work on. And I think it's something everyone needs to work on, because if you only bring your best self to work, who misses out on that best self if it's undertaken to work? And I've seen it happen to others, and you bring it up, and I think it's worth reiterating that balance is quite important. And again, you helped me set up the next topic area, Daniel, around post-COVID-19. So we all got hit with this pandemic. Industry engaged with it in a certain way, government engaged with it in a certain way, and the most visible were state and federal. But from a local government perspective, do you think the COVID process impacted the practice of leadership from what you could see in your experience? Did it enhance something, or did it do nothing and it was just business as usual?
Really quickly, before I touch on that, I do just want to share that second capability, which was around storytelling.
Sure. Sorry. I jumped ahead. Yeah, go for it.
Sorry. Just don't want to tick off on my notes here, because the storytelling piece, I think, we don't need to labour on it, but it's a really powerful piece, because if you are in a leadership position by virtue of whatever characteristics you've displayed, or just by circumstance, if you cannot tell a story in at least a moderately convincing and compelling way, then you will have difficulty with people not only following the directions or the influence you're trying, but people giving you credibility in that position. And it's an art. So, storytelling is an art that you can learn, and some people can do it habitually. Some people just need to work at it a bit more. But I think that's, they're the two, that emotional resilience and storytelling from a leadership capability in the contemporary world, I think are my two highlights. And then the COVID question in particular, have leaders changed the way we practice leadership because of COVID? In a local government space, unquestionably, and it's almost disappointing, because I proudly label myself in that millennial cohort, and it was really frustrating that when we look back, the motivation and the real dictator behind remote working, from a local government perspective, I should be very clear on that, was COVID-19. It was not any progressive, forward-thinking, pioneering type approaches to how do we deliver services in the most effective way for our community. It was quite sadly COVID-19, which has now forced organisations in the local government space to, and some were better equipped than others at the time. That's a byproduct of them having resources in the tech space. But to be able to consider the work environment in a different way. And I've, again, being proudly millennial, I've always focused on outcomes as opposed to the location. And the terminology I use as a results-orientated work environment. For whatever reason, if someone wants to be connected into the free Wi-Fi down the road and do their work at 4:30 in the morning, I mean, yes, I care about that, because I want to make sure that their sanity is intact and everything else is happening because they're a part of the team. But I mean, if for whatever reason that is the most productive use of their time, then it would seem really counterproductive to force someone to sit at a desk in a cubicle in that area at this time and finish at that time to get the work done. So I'm probably not pioneering anything when I suggest some of this stuff, but in response to the question, I think it's overly disappointing for people of my generation to know that it was COVID-19 that made that shift. And now what we're seeing is there's going to be this continual tension between those organisations who can do it and do it well, and those organisations who revert either quickly or in a drip feeding fashion over time back towards the You must sit at your chair, at your desk, in your space, at your time to do the work that we all need done. And I guess my response is yes, we have changed. Or COVID-19 did change us. It changed us in a good way. And I think our challenge from a sector perspective is to find ways not to go back to the older, perceived efficient ways of working and adopt and embed and embody these new ways of working. Because the next generation is only going to find a faster way to do it than us anyway.
Thank you for that response. And for those that are listening or watching this, a good interviewer lets his guest actually answer the question before interrupting them. So I apologize profusely for cutting you off before. This is about learning the craft, and I really stuffed up before, so I apologize for that. Interesting responses, Daniel. I think the one around COVID, I hadn't thought about too much, that it, in some senses, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, and I will allow you to answer me this time, is it took a pandemic for people to start thinking more about some of the things that COVID-19 brought up, and that is to the detriment of all of us, I think. Now, that's not to say some didn't embrace it, and I think it hit different people differently. As an example, I've always been work from home, or at least the last 10 years I have, so the being stuck at home and doing the work from home thing was a no-brainer for me. But for those human beings that we work with that get energized from others and need to be in a workspace, it would have sucked. It would have really not been good. And in over and above that, the hybrid working arrangements in a local government sense is an interesting space to talk about. And I don't presume for a second that wasn't already being done, but I have my doubts that it was a common thing across the local government sector. So from your experiences, have people in the local government sector, and I mean broadly, not just Queensland, but do you think that sector-wide that local government is reviewing its response to COVID, and what does the world of work mean for councils beyond COVID-19?
Yeah, definitely there is a large-scale review happening from a sector perspective, but also individual councils. And by way of example, I've certainly worked at some councils in the past, and I know of many others that were violently opposed to any staff member, either current staff member working remotely or someone who was applying for a role that that proposed they do the role remotely instead of relocating to and within the region. There's a couple of nuances here. One is when you consider the southeast Queensland catchment of councils, many people will live in one council area, but cross a border just innocuously to go to their work into another council area. And that's not viewed as problematic. But certainly when you move more to the regional councils, that it always was a really parochial position, that if you were to work for us and deliver services for our community, then you were to be a part of us, a part of our community. And I think what's good is that has changed, that has shifted a little bit, but again, not really by choice, by circumstance. So I know that there are a number of individuals across the sector who are working in a council area, but supporting a regional council in a different area. And I think that's great. I think it needs to be monitored. We don't want everybody working in southeast Queensland supporting regional Queensland. That just won't work. And there are just some jobs that one of the real challenges is you can't operate a grader from home. Not now, anyway. Maybe in the future there'll be an autonomous grader that can do this work. Who knows? But there have been some people in some roles who have been advantaged by COVID and others who have not. And I mean, even to the extent now, we're really hopeful that we'll get a version of a 4-day work week for our staff at the conclusion of this enterprise agreement. And I'm sure we will. But some private sector organisations have been doing 4-day work weeks for a long time. Some of them, and a lot of the empirical research has shown that the productivity has not reduced. At the very least, it's maintained itself, if not increased. And I don't know, actually, I'm pretty certain as a sector, we're not mature enough And as a society, we're not mature enough yet for local government workers to be working 4 days a week instead of 5 without having compressed their hours from 5 days into the 4. Even though the empirical data shows in many private sector organisations, their productivity is the same. I don't think we're there yet as a society for that to be accepted, especially when the view is, you work for the public service, and I strongly support public service being a verb. It is a doing word, and I think we're probably many years away from that being an acceptable position from a public service perspective.
Yeah, that will change. I mean, I know with state government that flexibility in hours and delivery of what you need to deliver is not so. It's not such an issue as long as you get those hours done and the work gets done. The question around when you do them, and then the bigger question, and this isn't something I would want you to respond on. I'm just waxing lyrical here a bit. Is the outside perception of what council is meant to do, and that somehow as a ratepayer, if I see Daniel walking outside on Friday and he's done his 4-day week, I'm not getting my money's worth because he's not working on a Friday. I think it's a whole lot of horse shit. That's just my perspective. I'm sure you have some views, but I think workplaces have to get flexible. And if we've taken anything out of the pandemic or any other calamities that will come into the future, that flexibility is the byword here. And you have to trust the people that work on your behalf. But that, again, that's a whole nother discussion, Daniel. Let me ask you, nature versus nurture question. Are leaders born or are they made?
Both. I hate being a fence sitter, but the reality for me in responding to this question is I use myself as an example. I didn't know what leadership was when I was younger. I had to learn it. But some people will innately display those leadership qualities and capabilities, and they might not know they're doing it. I am very confident to say I was not doing it when I was younger. I just simply was playing sport to the best of my ability, and as a result, there's a view that people were following me. But I know now that I'm a much better leader than I was, and I also know that I've got a long way to go on my leadership journey. But that is a result of being exposed to some really great leaders. So if I had not have been exposed in that nurturing way, then naturally I am very confident my trajectory of leadership would have capitulated at some point. And I may have been a washed-up footy player, but I would have been a washed-up leader as well.
Yeah, I think that's a bit harsh. I reckon time and place and opportunity play a huge part here, and that's nothing you have any control over. So you were doing a good job. Someone noticed, more people noticed, and it sort of spirals from there. Where this gets interesting is that at some point the light bulb went off in your head. You went, well, hey, maybe this is something I want to do. But just as easily in another dimension, you might have said, hell no, I don't ever want to lead anyone. I'm just happy to do my thing and go home. And there's nothing wrong with that, because you can't have organizations, whether they're for community service or not for profit or even for profit. Not everyone can be in a leadership position, because you need teams to do some things, and you have to have that mix in the organization. So I get where you're coming from, and definitely not fence sitting, mate. I don't think there is a right or wrong on that one. I am a fence sitter, but the skew is more towards they're made rather than born. That you can, and this one is a good one, and I'm never getting rid of this question, because there really isn't a right or wrong. It's more, how do you argue the point? And so, yeah, I can agree with your position quite readily. So if you could go back to a younger version of Daniel Fletcher, what would you say to your younger self about being a more effective leader?
That is an additional part to the question that we didn't get prepped for. So that's good. Put me on the spot. I think for me, probably the most profound lesson I've learned is, or that I now try to embody, and it's not that I don't share this too much with people, but it's about how, not what you do as a leader. And I really want to be remembered by the people that I've had the privilege of leading by the way that I treated them or the way that we approached certain complex issues or really challenging moments. Not the fact that, and I'm a competitive guy. I'll tell you about my sporting background. I still enjoy a healthy competition. But the metrics of what leadership looks like in terms of, to be successful in this role, here are your KPIs and you need to meet them. To me, that's the what part of leadership. And I want to be, or if I was telling my younger self or any other younger version of anybody, I think it's about, you can always get that done, but how you get it done will be way more important than actually achieving it. And people will talk about how you did it. They'll remember how you did it. They won't remember that it was done. They'll talk about the stories that got you to the success, not about the fact that box was ticked or that KPI was met. And again, I've been fortunate to learn these lessons, some the hard way when I was probably in my earlier career in leadership spaces, but by great leaders in my work and in my the sporting world. They're always at the front of my mind because I'm regularly contacting these people as well to sound test and pressure test some of my current dilemmas that I have. And these people are from a workspace. They're Chris Rose, Jude Munro, Nigel Brown, Scott Mason. These people probably might not mean anything to the audience listening, but I think the power is learning through that space. And footy coaches like David Lake and Craig McRae that I had the benefit of being coached by, those people have had such a profound impact on my life and my now leadership style and it's all of those people were focused on the how, not the what. And that's and I now associate myself with those leaders and other similar leaders because that's the message I want to share. I would share with my younger self.
Yeah, I would say don't get it twisted. I think you give back to the people that you just mentioned there when you're seeking their counsel or advice. It makes them better leaders as well because it gets their grey matter ticking. So, mate, that's a really positive way to end the discussion. This has been really interesting. I have more questions that we can get done in the time, but I think we can come back for round 2, Daniel. So thank you for your time, mate.
No, it's been a pleasure, Eric. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
That concludes our podcast for today. I'd like to thank Daniel for sharing his insights with us. And again, the critical nature of local government is important, particularly the leaders that they help to develop that ultimately have a very positive impact on our community. So I'd like to thank Daniel and all of my local government guests for giving up their time and having a chat to me about this thing called leadership. Our next podcast drops on Monday, the 4th of September, featuring a discussion we had with Penny Johnson, who is the CEO of the Australian Horizons Foundation. As always, appreciate your support. Please drop a like or subscribe if you like the content we're putting out. Have a great day, rest of your week, and we'll catch everyone on the next episode of Talking Leadership TV.